Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tank12, everyone call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we are today taking a look at all of the bomb tanks that are in the game right now. No gameplay, yes, I know it might be a bit dry, but I just want to take a quick look at every single one of the tanks and just tell you guys real fast what I think about these vehicles. For most of them, I have made reviews, and the one tank that I think I miss is the M10 RBFM, but most of them I have really covered. It should be all of the vehicles that are currently in the primary selection, so it's 21. Let me check real fast. The one tank that is missing is the M46 Patton Korea, but I'm going to talk about that either way because I sold the M46 Patton Korea, so maybe it's not the best kind of sign, but yeah, it's about that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So I'm missing one more tank. The IS5. Oh yeah, I'm missing the Kreslavsky. I remember I should have put that one in there, but I definitely did forget to add the Kreslavsky to the primary selection. So let's go through all of the tanks that we have right here. We're going to start with the tier 10s. We're going to do them first, and then we're going to go over to the tier 8s. So we have the M60, we have the 121B, and we have the FV1066B. I've played most games in the FV1066B. I've played this tank when it was still a standard vehicle at tier 10 and you could unlock it. This is a tank that I personally enjoy, and it will set you back 12,000 bonds. Now the question is, would you really want to unlock this thing? It's one of the vehicles that actually is a side scraping tank. It has its turret at the rear, and I remember it was one of those novel features back in the days, and it was quite interesting. Nowadays you have the Super Conqueror, you have the Conqueror at tier 9 and 10, and thus they took out the FV1066B. Now this tank, the gun itself is great. Mobility also wasn't the worst, just had very bad specific power to weight ratio. Survivability on paper, everything looks great. Firepower looks great because it's the beautiful Conqueror turret with the 120mm gun that we've gotten used to. You can see the DPM is amazing. Now, where do the things go wrong with this thing? It actually has 410 meters base view range, which is also quite good, but unfortunately it just doesn't really hold a candle to a lot of other tier 10 tanks anymore. One of the main reasons is the lack of armor on the sides. You can see this is the turret right here, and this is kind of the turret ring where the crew is sitting. The crew is right in here. And the issue, as you can see, is that the turret ring over here, you can actually penetrate very easily. It's like very thin, and over here as well. So it was very easy to just go through right these parts right there when you were side scraping, and especially when you were side scraping, you were angling like this sometimes maybe, and it was just very easy to go right through there. Yeah, that was one of the biggest issues. Obviously, you do not have the best gun depression with it, and specific power to weight ratio is quite bad. I also had the thing in mind that it was actually faster, but it turns out it's not that fast. So the question is it really worth it? I think if you play the Super Conquerors, you probably don't have a need for the FV1066B, unless you're a real big fan of tanks that have rear-facing turrets. This tank just doesn't really, it's not really a vehicle that is very competitive anymore, unfortunately. So 12,000 bonds is quite steep, and I'm not really sure if you want to invest that. If you're a tank collector, obviously do that. If you're a fan of British vehicles, this is also not a bad choice. It's just that the armor is not going to hold up anymore, especially with those weak spots on the side. It's very easily taken care of when you're trying to side scrape, and I think a majority of the player base knows about the weak spots of the FV1066B. Moving on to the M60. I am a very big fan of the M48 Patton. That's my tier 10 medium tank that I played the most, and probably the tier 10 medium tank that I enjoy the most with the Leopard 1. Now the M48 Patton has one downside, and it's that it's quite big and it's not the fastest. Now the M60 changes that, at least one of the two things. It's still very large, but it has 65 kilometers per hour top speed with a very nice 22.44 specific power to weight ratio. So you can see that I have turbocharger on here, but this is a tank that is very fast. So if you want to have an M48 that is faster, the M60 is great for that. The only thing that is a bit of a downside, you'll lose a lot of the armor. You lose armor on the hull because it's no longer like circular. Now it's very angled, and unfortunately it's only 93 millimeters thick. Then you go to the turret. Even though the turret has gotten some major improvements, and the turret is now just as thick as the M48, the issue is that the cupola on top isn't as small as on the M48. If we take a look at the M48, you can actually see that the turret on that thing is quite nice, and it's not as easily penetratable. And you can see if you're using like a skin like this, it's even more difficult to see the weak spot right there, because there's like so much stuff all over that turret, and unfortunately it's a very big weak spot. So armor wise, this is a bit of a letdown. Spotting wise, it's great. Gun wise, it's great. 9 degrees of gun depression. You basically have a faster M48, and that is worth it to me. Now if you're a medium tank player who likes to have accuracy, who likes to have mobility, and maybe a little bit of armor, the M48 would be a great choice if it was faster, but the M60 is perfect for that. You can spot as well. The only downside as well is the concealment level is quite low. You can see I'm currently running Bounty exhaust system to have a little bit extra concealment, and I've pushed it quite far with Coca-Cola as well, and even with directives. It's not the most stealthy tank because of its size, but you can get it even further if you upgrade that, and if you you know, do the field modification upgrade. Other than that, it's a great tank. I enjoy it very much. Moving on to the 121B, one of the tanks that they have buffed significantly over the last 1 or 2 years, and it's the 121 with basically the L7 variant. You can see they have mounted the L7C. It's the legendary British L7 gun, and it's very nice. Actually, it's a very interesting feature because the 121 is running a 122mm gun, and when you're running with the L7 gun, you lose a bit of the alpha damage, but you gain nice average pen. You get like real great heat shells. The shell velocity is great. The high explosive pen is amazing. You have 105mm of pen. You know, the DPM is great if you have the right loadout and the right crew. Dispersion, aim time, all of those things are great. Gun traverse as well. The only big downside to this tank, in my personal objective or personal opinion, is you only have 5 degrees of gun depression, and that can ruin your tank. There are a lot of maps where there are no like even grounds, and you'll just have to fight with like little hills and ridges and mountains. This tank is not going to fare very good, so you should probably play this with the heavy tanks where you have flat slopes. Other than that, you have amazing armor. Turret armor is incredible. Hull armor is really good. 1950 hit points. You have very good mobility. The only downside is the specific power to weight ratio is a bit lacking for a medium tank, but still 60 kilometers top speed and almost 60 degrees per second traverse speed right there. Concealment is also okay. You can push it further if you want to with field modifications with the equipment, and spotting on the other side is also quite okay. I think it's 420 meters base view range. Oh, I just noticed that I don't have any equipment for it, so view range is also very good in comparison to other Chinese tanks. I think the 121 could have a 410 meters. I'm not sure if the 121 has 420 meters base view range, because that would also be quite impressive. 400 meters, so you get an additional 20 meters base view range. Now, as I mentioned, yeah, gun depression is the biggest letdown on this tank, and if you cannot live with a tank that doesn't have any gun depression, don't go for this one. Don't go for the Chinese line. They lack any kind of gun depression. So, moving on to Tier 8. we've covered basically the tier 10s. We're going to take a look at the heavy tanks first, and then we're going to move on to the mediums and then the light tanks and TDs. So first off, we have the Chrysler K. This is the version you are actually... No, you're... Wait. God damn it. Okay. Cutting that out. This is the Chrysler K. The Chrysler K... I'm not sure if you're getting a GF or if you're getting a K version. We're going to check real fast. So the K, there's no difference except for the skin. So okay, you're getting a GF instead of the K. So yeah, pick this one because it's currently like available for 10 games. I'm not going to play it, but basically it's the same concept. The tank itself is very good if you do as it is intended to be played, or in the way that it is intended to be played. That means front towards enemy, and you also use quite a bit of gold. Unfortunately, the standard pen is a bit lacking, 198 millimeters of penetration. Not very good in open maps, is very good in city maps, has a rear facing turret, and you have 6 degrees of gun depression. Dispersion is okay, the aim time is very good, but yeah, it's basically firepower is average. Armor is above average, really good. This tank is almost indestructible from the front. From the side, very easily taken care of, but from the front, very difficult time to go through the very thick hide that this tank has at the top. Lower plate is a weak spot, cupola is a weak spot. Other than that, there are no apparent weak spots on this vehicle, unfortunately. Mobility wise, it also isn't too bad. Specific power to weight ratio is actually quite nice on this vehicle. Top speed is lacking 35 kilometers, so if you're using this one, turbocharger is probably a very good idea. Traverse speed is also not too bad. You can see the engine power is that's quite a beefy engine to have in this vehicle. Yeah, concealment and spotting are both going to be pretty whack, but yeah, this tank is very good if you're only playing it as a heavy tank, as it was designed in a city environment where you can basically side scrape. Other than that, it's a very boring tank, and I would say I would skip this one, even though it's very powerful. If you're really a fan of those rear face turrets, just maybe it's for you, but personally for me, it's such boring gameplay, and when you can pen the tier 9 and tier 10 tanks, which eventually will happen, you'll have to resort to gold, and your benefit of being a premium tank goes away in that scenario. Moving on to the T26E5, another American heavy tank at tier 8. A heavy tank that I enjoy a lot of. I played a lot of games, I 3-marked this one, big fan of the vehicle. Great average pen, you know, very bad average damage. So the alpha is probably a killer for a lot of players. So if you don't like tanks with low alpha, basically skip this one. You're gonna not enjoy this one. 10 degrees of gun depression is amazing. Aim time is nice. Dispersion is okay. It's not the best, but I'd say the damage per minute is quite nice as well. Gun traverse is a bit lacking, but you have very good turret armor. Your turret armor, impressive. 191 millimeters at the front, 114 at the side, 127 at the rear. This tank is very good in those hill battles and the ridgeline fights, and it's actually not too slow. Top speed 40 kilometers. Specific power to weight ratio is a bit lacking, 15.06 horsepower per ton with the upgrade, and yeah, traverse speed is also not the best, but generally speaking, I'd say this is a very good all-rounder. Spotting is not the best either without the crew and without any equipment for that. Base view range should be 380 meters, if I recall correctly. What? Why is it at 388 view range when... Oh yeah, never mind. Okay, I have something on it to improve concealment or something. I have no idea. But yeah, view range, not the best. But generally speaking, a very good tank, very good all-rounder, forgives a lot of mistakes, and you can have a lot of fun if you can look past the very low alpha damage that the gun has. Moving on, we're going to go to the Kreslavsky, and the Kreslavsky is a tank that I haven't played in a very long time, so excuse me if I may say a bit of trash, or if I recall incorrectly. So it has a 107mm gun. This is a gun that you might be familiar with because it's almost the same one that I'm not really sure which tank it was. Oh yeah, it's the KTTS. It's the KV4, which is a TD. That thing has the same gun, and the gun has very bad dispersion, as you can see, 0.36. Aim time is horrendous as well. Pen is quite nice, 227 millimeters. Alpha damage for a 107 millimeter gun at 320 isn't the highest. And you can see the DPM is not the best. Gun depression for a Russian tank, 7 degrees is okay, and gun traverse is also not the best. The only thing that I think is okay is that this gun is not the most reliable, but it's still fun to shoot. It's fun to hit targets with this gun. The shell velocity is okay, 1043 meters per second with the AP shell. And basically, this is another tank that has the turret a bit further at the back. It's not exactly in the middle, it's not exactly at the rear, but it's further in the back than other tanks because it's so large. It's very long, it's very big. The main strength of this tank is definitely its armor. It has a lot of armor at the front, a lot of armor on the turret, and it's one of those Soviet tanks that is very difficult to penetrate actually from the front, even from the side, and you have a little bit of a awkward engagement with it. Other than that, I think mobility-wise, top speed 40 kilometers is not too bad. Engine power once again very high, but you can also see the weight is extremely high. You almost have 110 tons. So the specific power to weight ratio is also not very good. So generally speaking, you might have top speed, but it'll take you some time to reach the 40 kilometers per hour. And also view range, as per usual for a Soviet heavy tank, not very good. And thus, I would say this is certainly only for the real Soviet fans that want to have a very special tank, collector's item, and yeah, not really for a lot of the other players who are trying to play competitively, because generally speaking, I think the armor is amazing. Yes, if you're a huge fan of armor, this is probably the best armored tank at tier 8 for a premium, one of the best. And the gun is also fairly competent with the right equipment, but I haven't played it in a while, so I can't really be that honest with you, unfortunately, or I can't really tell you exactly if I would go for it or not. I probably wouldn't skip the KV4 Kreslavsky. Moving on to the IS-6, the forever living legend. This tank, you actually would get the IS-6B, so the black edition. I have the IS-6, so I didn't need the black edition. I don't really care about it, but it's exactly the same tank, and it's a legend of the game. So what do you get with this thing? You get basically a brawler that has a gun that isn't capable of penning anything above a tier 8. Even at tier 8, it has some issues. It's incredibly inaccurate. Terrible gun depression. Aim time takes forever. Alpha damage at 390 for tier 8 is fairly nice. So everything is looking like a pretty big shitfest. You only have 30 rounds of ammunition on your tank, which you run out of quite quickly. And it's an old school premium, yes, but it has that special Soviet armor. It has that armor that just bounces shots from everywhere. It has so much side armor. It has so much like spaced armor on the tank itself, all around the vehicle. It's incredibly difficult to take care of, and it's really frustrating to play against sometimes. Generally speaking, you have priority matchmaking. That is matchmaking with here you have matchmaking, or I forgot the name. I forgot the name. But you have priority matchmaking, so you'll never be facing tier 10 tanks, only tier 9s. And I think this tank is still very enjoyable. Top speed, used to be really good with 35 kilometers per hour. Specific power to weight ratio, everything used to be really nice on this thing, until it turned out that there were better options, and the IS-6 is just no longer really the tank that I would pick for, at first. But still, it's a legend of the game. It's still enjoyable. It just doesn't really perform as well as other tanks in this list do. Because if you want to have a tank that is kind of similar in the playstyle of the IS-6, you can choose the WZ-111 or maybe even the IS-5. But we'll get to those tanks in a moment. but I have to say the IS-6, I would go for it if you like the playstyle of Soviet heavy tanks and you can live with the fact that you do not have the best pen and that you'll have to work with your armor and the mobility. You'll have to get really close to the fight. Other than that, I think it's still a very good tank. I still enjoy it when I'm playing it. It just lacks the pen, and that might be a killer for anyone who wants a tank that has enough pen to be competitive. Moving on to the IS-5. Now the IS-5 is probably one of my most watched reviews on my YouTube channel, and it probably still holds true. Now, the IS-5 is a tank that used to be a Clan Wars reward vehicle, and that's why I really wanted to get this tank. Look at the skin, it looks really nice. It's the old school kind of armor layout for the IS-8 or the T10 nowadays, and the turret is also the stock variant kind of. You know, all of the IS tanks, they're all like connected to one another, so basically they're all brothers and they all look very similar to one another. So you have 390 alpha like the IS-6, but you have a much better gun. The gun that you have on this vehicle actually is a lot more reliable in terms of being able to pen enemies. 221mm of penetration, and you don't get APCR shells as premium shells. You get heat shells with 270mm of penetration. They might not have the best shell velocity, but they are at least heat shells. Now the APCR shells have incredible shell velocity, 1,400 meters per second. That is incredible. That's on tier 10 levels. So that's very nice. 7 degrees of gun depression, also very nice if you compare it to the IS-6. You have 6, used to be 5, I think. Aim time is also very long. Dispersion is also very bad. Traverse time also not very good. And generally speaking, the armor is a lot worse than on the IS-6. You don't have as much spaced armor as on the IS-6. You have less hit points, if I recall correctly, or about the same. The hull armor is just worse all around. It's very easy to go through it. The turret armor is okay, it's decent, but you can also go through the cheeks right here and the cupola at the back. So the armor is not as reliable as with the IS-6, but you have better mobility. You have 42 kilometers per hour top speed, you have better traverse speed, you have better specific power to weight. So this is a tank that is basically like the IS-6, but with some very nice little additions, and which it had to kind of switch in for the armor, or the lack of armor. Spotting is also quite bad. Concealment is also not the best. But generally speaking, this is like an IS-6 that has the pen that you are missing on the IS-6, and it lacks the armor that you have on the IS-6. But generally speaking, I still enjoy this tank. If you're a collector, you'll definitely have picked this one up already. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it. I enjoy the IS-6. I enjoy the IS-5 as well. Enjoy both of the tanks. They look worse on paper than they actually are in the game. I think they run a lot better than we give them credit. And they are capable of running with some medium tanks and being like really good supportive heavy tanks. So generally speaking, I like both of them. Moving on to the AMX M4 MLE49. This is probably one of those no bullshit heavy tanks that you can get at tier 8. It has a nice 100mm gun that is not the most accurate, it's not the best with aim time, not the best DPM, but it has 10 degrees of gun depression, it has 232mm of penetration, it has some really nasty 263mm of pen with the APCR shell, and yeah, just generally speaking, it's a decent vehicle with decent gun. Survivability wise, this tank doesn't joke around. Incredible hull armor at the front, incredible turret. This turret is even like the turret that I would prefer when I'm playing the tier 8 non-premium tank, because that turret is better than the upgraded turret on that tier on the AMX 65T. So generally speaking, this turret is really good. The platform is really good. Mobility wise, this tank is also not the worst. It's faster than the IS-5, it's faster than the IS-6, it has better specific power to weight ratio, and it weighs 75 tons. So generally speaking, a very good money printing machine, and you can see I really enjoy this tank. I even went with a turbo, and I haven't regretted anything with that thing. So view range wise, you're also gonna have better view range, about 370 meters, and yeah, this is a definite buy. If you want to have a tier 8 premium heavy tank, this certainly is a very good option. Moving on to the WZ111, the final premium heavy tank that we have in the pawn shop, and it's a really cool tank. I enjoy it. I just made a review about it. I think it's basically a tank that, just like the IS-6, but it's even more aggressive in the way that you handle it. It has heat shells, which are quite nice, 250 millimeters of penetration, but very bad shell velocity. AP shells that aren't that great. You can see 196 millimeters of penetration, and yeah, DPM is okay. Dispersion, aim time, terrible, as I mentioned again, and it's a Chinese tank, no gun depression. You can look for that elsewhere, but the gun is still, it's fairly competent. It'll just take some time to get used to, and you're playing it as a heavy. It actually has some nice armor. The hull armor has been overworked. The lower plate now is the main weak spot. The upper plate is very thick, and the turret armor is also quite thick, except for the cupolas at the back. Very easy weak spots. That's why I went with improved hardening class 1. Mobility wise, this tank is very fast, 50 kilometers per hour top speed. It's faster than the IS-6 by 15 kilometers. Specific power to weight ratio is very similar to the IS-6, but it's just more mobile, and I think that's why a lot of players probably enjoy this tank. View range wise, it's pretty horrendous. 380. Well, it's not horrendous if you compare it to the IS tanks. It's pretty good actually if you compare it to the IS tanks, because both the IS tanks only have like 350, 60 meters view range. So you can see that the IS-6 is a bit of an old school tank. This also has preferential matchmaking, if I recall correctly. The IS-6 has preferential matchmaking, this one has preferential matchmaking, and another tank should have preferential matchmaking, the T-34-3. But first we go to the Primo Victoria. So the Primo Victoria, you can see I enjoyed this tank. It's going to be the Stutzwagen 81 for you guys. I enjoyed the vehicle, I free-marked it, and it wasn't actually too difficult. That being said, maybe it's because the tank is not the very best. It has great pen. It has a 83.7 millimeter gun. I think it's a 17. What kind of a millimeter? 84 millimeter gun. It's the same as with the Centurion 1. The average damage is very bad. The rate of fire is okay. It's actually quite lacking. The DPM is not the best on this tank. Dispersion is great, aim time is great, gun depression is great, gun traverse is great. You'll have really, really good sniping sessions with this tank, even though sometimes you just want to turn this motherfucker around and dump it into the ocean because RNG is absolutely screwing you over. But generally speaking, the gun should be very nice, except for the low alpha damage, which once again could be a major downturn for anyone who wants to play a medium tank with a little bit of beefy gun. That's unfortunately not the case here. Hit points wise, it isn't very good, 1450. It's about on par with other tier 8 medium tanks. Hull armor is terrible, it's a Centurion. Turret armor is decent, even though there are a lot of weak spots. Right here you can shoot the tank, you can pen. Right here you can shoot the tank, you can pen. You can shoot up here and go through the tank if you know what you're doing. But generally speaking, armor on the turret is definitely better than on the hull, and you can work it on ridge lines. But don't be surprised if shots will make it through, because heat shells usually just bunch up on the forehead of this tank, unfortunately. Mobility wise, it's actually fairly decent, 50 kilometers per hour top speed. That is without the without a turbocharger. Engine power isn't too bad either. You can get it up to about 20 horsepower per ton, which is fairly decent. Traverse speed is not the best since it's a Centurion. Concealment is also not the best since it's quite large. It's a very long tank. But spotting is okay. Spotting on this thing, it should be 400 meters base view range. And I think at tier 8, 400 meters is fairly decent with the complete crew, with a little bit of equipment, you can make it better. But I was just trying to get like a better rate of fire. So I went with vents. Didn't bother me too much in the end. Still managed to 3-mark it, but I haven't played it since. So moving on, we have the T34-3, probably my best viewed review of a tank in a very long time. This tank is amazing. That's all I can say. It's a tank that I would really recommend to everyone who likes to play fast, aggressive vehicles. It has a great gun. I know that the dispersion, the aim time, you know, the pen, everything doesn't look that great. Gun traverse looks great. 6.5 degrees of gun depression looks pretty terrible if you just compare it to the 10 degrees that we had on the Primo Victoria. But you have that bloody alpha. You have that alpha. You can do so much damage with this thing. And it just has armor as well. It has armor. It will survive a lot of the shots that are that you might just be tanking with your turret. It has some mobility to get from point A to B. The only downside is the specific power to weight ratio is a bit lacking, because you can see the engine is severely, or it's a bit underpowered for the amount of the amount of tonnage it's moving around. But great traverse speed, great turret traverse speed, decent camo if you have the full crew on it. Spotting is also not the worst. You have, I think, 380 meters base view range. You can work with that with the right equipment, and it's just such a joy to play. It's so much fun to hit tanks with that 390 alpha. So definitely a tank for anyone who wants to play aggressive tanks. Very enjoyable, and I don't think you're going to regret it, because it has preferential matchmaking. No tier 9 tanks, no tier 10 tanks. You have to face tier 9s, but tier 10 tanks, no, nothing happens there. You do have 1,400 hit points, which was buffed, so it was buffed to 1,400 from 1,300. Very good choice, definitely my stamp of approval. My favorite tier 8 medium tank at the moment. I've enjoyed it so much. The Primo Victoria, as I mentioned, definitely a good tank for players who like to snipe, who want to have a little bit of an all-rounder. It doesn't do anything very good, but it does everything decently. So, yeah, if you're looking for something like that, Primo Victoria Centurion is always a good option. Moving on to the STG Guard. STG Guard, there are a lot of comparison between the Guard and the T34-3, because both of the tanks feature a 122mm gun. Now the difference is that the STG Guard is incredibly good at sniping. As you can see, dispersion values are really good, aim time is really good, DPM is decent, 212mm of penetration for a tier 8 medium tank, very nice. The only thing that you're lacking, gun traverse speed, it's not the best. Just gun depression is terrible. It's a rear-faced turret once again, but it's a very low profile tank, so I don't think it's going to be that much of a problem. Survivability wise, 1,350 hit points, not the best on the lower spectrum of medium tanks. Armor on the turret is quite nice, but on the hull it's a bit lacking. But since the armor is so weird, like it's very flat, you might bounce some shots from the front, but don't count on it. The armor is not very good, especially the sides are quite terrible, and the turret has a very big weak spot, which is the cupola. Like, look at that thing protruding out of the tank. Oh my god. Call a doctor, he has a massive thing on his forehead. Moving on to mobility, it's actually not too bad. Same as the T34-3, as you can see. The engine power is actually worse, and it weighs almost the same as the T34-3. But what you can see is that it has the same top speed. So I'm not really sure what the Russians are using in their engines, but Russian bias, question mark. Yeah, mobility is quite nice. Concealment is also not bad, as I'm not running any crew on it. And you can see that this is where I'm still using gun lane drive, and that's something that I would not recommend. So if you're looking for a Soviet tank, a medium tank, but you want to have the alpha, and at the same time you want to have a little bit of accuracy, you know, a little bit of reliance once in your life, the STG Guard is an incredible good choice. It's a very nice tank. It will get your credits, and you do not have to dip into the premium shells too often. and it's still going to be quite fine. A tank that I really enjoy, tank that I like, and I marked at least 2 guns marks of excellence on it, and I'm definitely going to mark this tank eventually, but right now I have other things to do. So this gets my stamp of approval as well. A very fun tank, enjoyable if you are willing to play it a bit more passively than the T-34-3. If you want to play aggressive, get the T-34-3. If you want to play passive, get the STG Guard. Now, moving on to the only Swiss tank in the game, and I marked it because I had to, and it's a great tank. I think a lot of players kind of underestimate this one, and yeah, I don't really know why. It's like the Indian Panzer. I think this tank is awesome. 250 alpha, it's a 90mm gun, so it's okay. Not the best alpha. If you want to have more alpha, once again, maybe skip this tank. Average pen is really good, 212mm of penetration. Rate of fire is fairly decent, but it's not the best. DPM on par with the T-34-3 and the STG Guard. Accuracy, fairly nice. Aim time, fairly nice. Gun depression, fairly nice. Very nice. Very, very nice. And gun traverse, also fairly nice. Survivability wise, this tank, oh, you can throw it into the bin. No armor protection whatsoever. But you don't need that. Who needs armor when you have mobility? Moving on to mobility, this tank doesn't have the best mobility, but you can definitely work with it. 50 kilometers per hour top speed. Specific power to weight ratio is at 17.61 horsepower per ton, and it weighs almost 40 tons. Generally speaking, I think this tank is fairly mobile. It's mobile enough with the right equipment. And concealment-wise, it's actually not the worst either. Spotting-wise, 390 meter space view range, almost on par with the Primo Victoria, but it's going to be more flexible than the Primo Victoria because it's faster. Has a better... Actually, no. You know what? I retract that statement. It's worse. It's slower, but it's about on par. The only difference is the Primo Victoria actually has a bit of armor, while this thing doesn't, but it kind of doesn't have that bad of RNG. I know it's weird, but I don't have the feeling that the gun is as bad as with the Primo Victoria. I much rather have this 90mm gun than the 84mm gun of the Primo Victoria, because it's just much more reliable. And you have 105mm, no, you have 90mm of penetration with the high explosive shell. Really nice. I can only recommend. The Primo Victoria, how much pen does he have with the, obviously only 42mm. These Scandinavians, they just don't invest their money into high explosive shells. Moving on to the light tanks and then the tank destroyers. We have the German lekpz M46 mm GF. So if we would translate that, it would mean leichter Kampfpanzer M41 90mm. So it's basically a light fighting tank, or a light tank, M41 90mm, and GF is for the GF style. I'm not really sure. So I haven't 3-marked this one. I've 2-marked it, but I've had quite a lot of fun with it because unlike the other M41s that you do find in the game, it has a 90mm gun, and that is the, you know, that's the really cool feature about this one. 182mm of penetration, maybe not the best, but you have 240 alpha for a light tank. At tier 8, that was once the highest alpha for a tier 8 light tank. Nowadays it has changed a little bit. Great gun depression angles, good rate of fire, very good DPM. Accuracy is okay, aim time is great, 8 degrees of gun depression, not too bad. And you have heat shells. These heat shells have 250mm of penetration. The AP shells only have 182, and the high explosive shells actually have 102mm of penetration. So very nice high explosive shells. I like, especially when you go up against other light tanks. You can just ruin their day. No armor whatsoever. It's an M41. What are you expecting? Very good mobility, incredible mobility, the best mobility, you know. You can use all of the superlatives right there. Concealment, spotting, everything top notch. A tank that I really enjoy. If you like a light tank that can actually fight back if it has to, this is your choice. If you don't like light tanks that are quite large, because the M4190 GF is actually very tall. If you compare it, like the STG Guard is lower. It's as tall as the Panzer 58 Mutz, so it's a very big one. Moving on to the Senlac. Now the Senlac is everything that the other British light tanks wish they were. It is small. It has a 84mm, it's 20-pounder gun. I have no idea. 20-pounder, so it's about maybe 85mm, maybe more than 70, I don't know. The gun itself is fairly nice, good DPM, good accuracy, good aim time, decent pen, at least for the caliber, if I recall correctly. 10 degrees of gun depression, fairly nice. And the APCR shells, they are okay. 223mm of penetration, that's actually quite bad. High explosive shells, 90mm of penetration, which I did not expect, but it was really nice. So I should definitely get rid of some of these APCR shells and get more high explosive shells. So this is a tank that you do not want to fight with. The armor is actually better than on the M41, on like the turret at least, 25, and there you have 32, so you know, better tank than the M41. I doubt it. It's a light tank, don't expect anything from this. Mobility wise, it's fairly competent, 65 kilometers per hour top speed, very good specific power to weight ratio. You can see the engine is severely overpowered. It's way too fast for its own good. Concealment, this is probably the main strength for this tank. That's how I play it if I get the crew on here. I'm trying to play as stealthily as I can because I just use this tank as a passive scout, and it's really good in that case. Now, the biggest gripe that I have with this tank is that the entire British line kind of sucks until you go to the Manticore. Manticore is fun, the Setter is fun, the LHMTV and the G-Sor are hell on earth, and I will not be playing those tanks ever again in my life. I hate them with a passion. And unfortunately, they did the wargaming move where they released a premium tank that is incredibly strong, or a premium tank that is fairly competitive, and then they release a line that is basically just complete garbage dump that is on fire. So yeah, Senlac, unfortunately, the tank itself, it's fun. If you really want to have a passive scout that is close to the, I don't want to, okay, good. I don't want to overextend myself. That is similar to the AMX, you know, AMX 90. This is the closest you'll get to. But other than that, the line itself is fairly forgetful and unenjoyable. You don't have the lack of ammo as the other light tanks have with the British, but you still aren't going to be like the biggest damage machine. Moving on to the T103, another favorite of mine. This is an incredible tank. It's a tank destroyer that basically has an incredibly big gun strapped to it. It should be 130mm, yes it is. B13 gun. It has very good average penetration. It has decent APCR or premium AP ammo penetration, and it has high explosive shells that unfortunately only have 65mm of penetration. But still, this tank slaps. 2,732 damage per minute with the gun rammer right here. I don't have the full crew on it. Gun traverse is trash. Aim time dispersion, fairly good for a Soviet tank destroyer. 8 degrees of gun depression, very good for a Soviet tank destroyer. I like it. Moving on to survivability, it has a huge forehead, and it actually is armored. The forehead is armored. That's something you wouldn't expect, but the hull is not armored. So it's a hull down tank destroyer for the Soviets, and it's a turret that fully goes around the vehicle, which is quite nice. It's very large, it's very long, and I probably only use it in like city areas or at the furthest part behind enemy lines because it's very difficult to keep concealed. But it has decent speed, 40 kilometers per hour top speed. It has decent engine power, so 14.15 specific horsepower per ton, or that is okay. Traverse speed is not the worst, 33.44, but concealment is fairly atrocious for a tank destroyer. Where is all of your hidden? How do you hide this thing? It's massive. So yeah, this is more of a tank destroyer that plays aggressively in the city and just waits for its turn when somebody has fired. You move your turret out behind rubble and you just slash them in the head with that massive 130mm gun, and it does really hurt the enemy team. Spotting wise, let us take a look. What's the base view range? Oh, it doesn't have a turret, so you can't even find out what the base view range is, because it actually will not show you. So my view range is basically 414 meters, but it should be like 370 meters view range about. So it's not the best, but still, it's a very fun tank. It's so much fun to hit tanks with this tank destroyer because it does the damage. It just racks up so much damage. And all of these tanks cost you 8,000 bonds. And, you know, those 8,000 bonds are difficult to get by. And, yeah, you definitely need to have a little bit of a choice. So this is definitely a good choice. The T-34 is a great choice. AMX is a good choice. The T-26 is a good choice. STG Guard is a good choice. You know, so many good choices. And you can decide which one you want. Moving on to tier 7, there's only one tank, and it's the IS-2 shielded. Personally, for me, it's not worth it. It's an IS-2 with some heat shields. It's basically just some mesh that they put around the tank. It actually works, so if somebody's firing heat at you, these do actually offer extra protection, and they might detonate the heat shell before it actually gets to the armor. Other than that, it's basically a IS-2 tank. Same kind of armor layout, same mobility, same gun, and yeah, if you have an IS tank, skip this one. You don't need to spend your 6,000, 7,000 bonds. I'm not really sure how much it is, but it's fairly expensive for tier 7. Now moving on to tier 6, there's the Tiger 131. This tank costs you 5,000 bonds, so fairly expensive. It was 5k or 3.5k. You'll have to check for yourself, because I cannot check for myself anymore because I already own the tanks. This one is fairly expensive, but it's a Tiger 131 that is at tier 6, and that's where the Tiger should be. I think the DPM is great. You know, the gun, everything is nice. It doesn't have the best pen, 145mm with the lower, you know, the short barrel 88mm gun. Survivability actually works at tier 6. The 100mm, they work. The box tank works at tier 6, but it's still going to get penned by other tier 6 vehicles if you do not angle. You'll have to angle. You have to learn how to angle with your German tanks that are box shaped. If you don't do it, you're gonna die. Mobility wise, actually fairly mobile. Specific power to weight ratio is not the best though, so it will take some time to crank that engine up. And spotting, it's at 380 meters, I think. No, 370 meters, so for a tier 6 tank, it's fairly competitive. Yeah, generally speaking, if you really have the itch for a Tiger tank at tier 6 and you're sick of playing the tier 7 one because it constantly gets up tiered against tier 9s, well, you're gonna have fun at tier 8 with the Tiger 131, but I personally would kind of skip this one. Moving on to the tier 5s, these are the final ones that we're looking at. The T-34S or shielded. Yeah, I would not pay 1,500 bonds for this tank. It was a reward tank, or basically a gift. And yeah, it's a T-34 with the 76mm gun. Doesn't even have the 57mm gun. Dispersion, aim time, everything is not the best. And mobility is going to be great. Survivability is going to be increased a little bit because of the shields that you have. But other than that, it's basically another T-34. Don't spend 1,500 bonds on this one, please. Unless you're a tank collector. It's not really worth it. The M10 RBFM, on the other hand, this is how premium tanks should be handled. This is a premium tank that actually is not better than the standard M10 Wolverine. The M10 Wolverine fully upgraded is definitely better than the M10 RBFM, but it's in the middle. It's better than the stock M10, and it's quite enjoyable. It has crazy DPM, as you can see right there, 2,145 damage per minute. Survivability is basically skippable. It's optional, and it has decent mobility, you know, and concealment and everything up to boot. If you want to have the crew completely stacked up, you can have some fun. shooting some tier 6 tanks, tier 5s. It's fairly competitive even at tier 7 if you can stay hidden. Very nice tank at tier 5, a tank that I would maybe even get for 1,500 bonds if you are a fan of tank destroyers. Now, finally, the final tank, and it's the Hydrostat. It's the Pzkfw 4, excuse me, and it'll set you back 5,000 bonds. This is where wargaming is like, if you really want to get this tank, you motherfucker have to pay. So 5,000 bonds, fairly expensive. Is it worth it? No, it's not worth it. Just play the regular Panzer 4. The Hydrostat is like it's like owning an iPhone. It's like owning a Tesla car. Why do you have that tank? To show off. You show off you have the Hydrostat. This used to be a tank you only get with a bundle up to $100 that you have to spend. Yeah, it's decent. It's fun to play. Mobility actually looks like it's great, but the specific power to weight ratio is not the best. But it has good top speed, concealment and spotting for a tier 5. Maybe not the worst. 330 meter space view range. I haven't played tier 5 in a long time, so I can't really tell you if it's that great. But yeah, this tank has a bit of armor. Well, it doesn't have the best armor, but it has some HP. The gun is definitely the star of the show. Very good rate of fire. But yeah, it's not worth the 5,000 bonds. No, never. Never is it worth the 5,000 bonds. So, I have taken a look at every single bond tank that is currently in the game that I own. 22 vehicles, and I've forgotten the M46 Patton Korea, as I mentioned prior. Let me get to the M46 Patton Korea, and I can go through it real quick. So, where is the M46 Patton Korea? Recovery. Oh, there it is. Why is it not in my garage? Well, I 3-marked this bad boy. Going over to statistics real fast. We'll have to find the M46 Patton Korea. Tier 8. Where is it? Let me find him. There he is. 130 games, 56% win rate, 854 average experience per game. I had the max experience in a game in this tank, 2,729 experience, with 6,000 damage dealt, 8 kills, and quite a bit of spotting, I remember. I really liked this tank. I enjoyed it. I have marked it to completion, 95%. And I just played it. I didn't do anything special. You can see my average damage moves at around 1,788. Unfortunately, this tank is going to get absolutely destroyed in the current meta. It has barely any armor. The pen is kind of ridiculous. It's fairly slow. Spotting is also not the best. It doesn't have the best view range, if I recall correctly. And it's just not an enjoyable tank. And to spend 8,000 bonds on a vehicle that will get you just nowhere is like a slap in the face by wargaming. So definitely skip the M46 Patton Korea. Tank that I cannot recommend. Now, if we go through them real fast again and talk about which tanks still kind of are relevant in the meta today. Yeah, that's a different question. So you want to have armor, you want to have a little bit of mobility, and you want to have a nice gun. Mobility and gun is probably more important than armor and mobility. So M60, yes. T26 E5, you can still work with that. Hydrostat, forget that. Tiger 131, yeah, tier 6, it's fairly nice, it's enjoyable. STG Guard, you can play with that, decent mobility. KB4 Kreslavsky, it's a bit more difficult if you stay in cities, yes. IS5 should work out, but it's gonna be a bit frustrating with the armor. Senlac, good scout, unfortunately bad line. Amex M4, decent tank, yeah, definitely get that if you can. T34, yes, you can still play it in the current meta. Alpine Tiger has preferential matchmaking, you can still play it in the meta. Even though it doesn't have the pen, you'll have to rely on premium ammunition quite a bit. Could be a deal breaker for anyone. The Chrysler K is not the worst, has enough hull armor, can deal with any vehicle at tier 8, but at tier 9 and 10 it has to resort to premium ammunition, so you'll have to spend a lot of credits. Other than that, it's a tank that still definitely works in a close quarter engagement and is mobile enough. M41 90mm GF, definitely worth it. Panzer 58 Mutz, pains me to say this, but I'm not really sure if a lot of players will enjoy this tank because they really need to learn how to play it. If you are able to learn how to play the Panzer 58 Mutz and you want to have a challenge, this is a tank that is very rewarding once you have mastered it. T-34S, no. IS-2S, no. Well, I mean, in the meta you can play it, but I wouldn't do it. IS-6, it's a tough one. Preferential matchmaking, thumbs up. Pen, thumbs down. Survivability, thumbs up. Mobility, it's in the middle. It depends. If you like Soviet tanks, I think in the meta it still will work. But unfortunately, there are just some tier 8 tanks that will crush your armor. And the premium shell spam, oof, you're going to have a bit of a hard time in some cases. But the armor still works. It still works. Still works, I tell you. Don't underestimate the IS-6. Never underestimate the IS-6 player. Don't do it. Definitely, yes. Thumbs up. Love this tank. Thumbs down. No, I wouldn't buy it anymore. Doesn't really work, especially at tier 10. Unfortunately, it's no longer a part of the game, and it's a reason why I took it out. RBFM, yes, it's a nice tank. 121B, nice tank if you can look past the very bad gun depression and not so stellar specific power to weight ratio. Primo Victoria, hard one. I 3-marked it, but I would not recommend it, I think, because the current meta with the Alpha only having 230 damage with a single shot, that's horrible. Yeah, I would kind of skip it. I probably prefer the STG Guard, T34-3, even the Panzer 58 Mutz instead of the Primo Victoria Pzkfw 81. So that concludes this complete overview. I've gone through every single tank. I'll have it all in the timestamps, and hopefully I was able to help out anyone who is interested in this topic, who wants to have an overview about every Bond tank. And these are my views. Some players might have complete different views and think that I am a complete idiot for saying that the T34-3 is a good tank. Obviously, you'll have to look out for yourself, get several sources in there, you know, just smush everything together and look at the entire picture. And if you see that somebody is like, you know, has a lot more subscribers, is maybe a lot better player than I am, and says that tank is trash, maybe you should trust them more than me. But you know, I've had my own personal experience with these tanks, and I've enjoyed a majority of them, but I would not recommend a majority of them. So I'm gonna finish this one. I've been talking for a very long time, and hopefully see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one. How am I going to make this this thumbnail? It's gonna be really weird.